A priestess stands alone in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. The air is thick with sacred vapor. She closes her eyes and receives a vision. When she opens them, her voice echoes through stone chambers.
A serpent will be born that will devour all empires.
This is not prophecy. This is warning. In 356 BC, in the remote kingdom of Macedon, a place the civilized Greeks called barbaric and backward, a child was born. His mother claimed Zeus himself had visited her as a serpent before conceiving him. His father was a king who had conquered through brutality and genius. And the prophecy that followed his birth would define not just his life, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. This is the story of how a boy became the conqueror of the world. This is Alexander. Philip II of Macedon did not look like a king when you first saw him. He had lost an eye in battle. His face was scarred. His left hand was permanently damaged from a siege weapon. But when he spoke, men followed. When he commanded, armies obeyed. He had taken a fractured, insignificant kingdom and through 20 years of relentless warfare transformed it into the most powerful military force in the entire Greek world. He conquered through intelligence as much as through violence. He made allies by marrying his daughters and sisters to neighboring kings. He made enemies by destroying those who resisted. He built roads so his armies could move faster than any enemy could anticipate. He was not just a warrior. He was a strategist who thought 20 moves ahead. In 357 BC, Philip married Olympias of Epirus. She was not a typical royal bride. She came from across the border, from a kingdom most Greeks considered foreign. She was mystical. She was devoted to the god Dionysus with an intensity that bordered on religious mania. She wore snakes around her arms during sacred rituals. She believed that divinity ran through her veins. That same year, 3 pieces of news arrived at Philip's palace on the same day. His general Parmenion had defeated an Illyrian army in a massive battle. His horse had won at the Olympic Games, the greatest honor a Macedonian could achieve. And his wife Olympias had given birth to a son. The child was born in July 356 BC in the city of Pella, Macedon's capital. His name was Alexander. Philip did not weep with joy. Philip calculated. 3 victories in one day. The gods were speaking. Olympias immediately began spreading a story that would follow Alexander his entire life. She whispered to priests and courtiers and servants that Zeus himself had visited her as a serpent before conceiving her son, that her child was half divine, that he was chosen by the gods for greatness, that ordinary rules did not apply to him. Philip heard these stories, and he did not dismiss them. Instead, he encouraged them. A son believed to be divine was a son who could command loyalty without question. A son believed to be half God could ask men to do impossible things, and they would attempt them because they believed he was destined to succeed. But Philip knew the truth. He did not believe in divine snakes or gods walking the earth. What Philip believed in was preparation. He began grooming Alexander from infancy for a single purpose: to conquer Persia, not to be king of Macedon, not to unite Greece, but to cross the Hellespont and destroy the greatest empire the world had ever known. Alexander's childhood was not like other children's. By age 7, he could ride horses that threw grown men to the ground. By age 9, he could kill with a sword. But the moment that defined him came when he was 9 years old and witnessed an impossible problem solved through observation rather than force. A black stallion arrived at Philip's palace. It was worth 15,000 drachmas, more money than most soldiers earned in a lifetime. The horse was wild. Every knight in Philip's court tried to ride it, and every one of them was thrown. The horse raged. The horse kicked. The horse seemed determined to kill anyone who attempted to mount it. Philip watched his generals fail one after another. He was ready to sell the horse as worthless. That was when young Alexander approached. He stood quietly watching the horse. The other children mocked him. The generals ignored him. But Alexander saw something they had all missed. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. Alexander turned the horse away from the sun. He spoke to it softly. He did not force it. He did not yell. He understood that violence was the tool of men who could not think. He calmed the horse through patience. Then he climbed onto its back. The horse did not buck. It did not rage. It carried Alexander across the courtyard in perfect obedience. Philip stood silent for a long moment. Then tears ran down his scarred face. He held his son and said words that Alexander would remember his entire life.
My son, find a kingdom big enough for you. Macedon is too small for your ambitions.
That horse, called Bucephalus, would carry Alexander for 20 years. It would carry him across deserts and mountains and rivers. It would carry him into battles that would reshape the world. But more importantly, the moment taught Alexander something that would define his entire approach to leadership. Understanding came before conquest. Observation came before action. The solution to an impossible problem was not to attack harder, but to see what everyone else had missed. When Alexander was 13 years old, Philip did something unprecedented. He hired Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the ancient world, to be Alexander's personal tutor. Aristotle arrived at a school on a hillside called Mysa, the school of the nymphs, and over the next 7 years he filled Alexander's mind with everything the ancient world knew. He taught Greek philosophy, the ideas of Plato and Socrates. He taught medicine by having Alexander observe the treatment of wounded soldiers returning from campaigns. He taught botany by walking through forests and identifying every plant and its uses. He taught politics by discussing how city-states were governed and why they failed. He taught Alexander that Greeks were civilized and everyone else in the world was barbaric and uncivilized. This last lesson would become the justification for everything Alexander would do. But the gift that changed Alexander forever was a book. It was Homer's Iliad, the story of the Trojan War and of Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived. Alexander became obsessed with it. He read it every single night. He slept with a copy under his pillow next to a sword his mother had given him. Achilles was not just a character in an ancient story to Alexander. Achilles was who he wanted to become, a warrior, a man whose name would echo through eternity. One night, at age 16, Aristotle found Alexander alone in the temple gardens holding the Iliad. Alexander was staring at the stars. Aristotle asked him what he was thinking about. Alexander turned to his tutor and asked a question that revealed everything.
Why must Greece be divided into city-states? Why can we not have one empire, one vision, one king?
Aristotle was deeply unsettled. He said,
Alexander, you speak of conquest, not philosophy. These are the thoughts of a conqueror, not a scholar.
Alexander smiled. Then I will be both. Everything changed in 337 BC. Philip, now at the absolute height of his power, made a decision that nearly destroyed his dynasty. He married a new wife. Her name was Cleopatra Eurydice. She was 14 years old. She was the niece of a general named Attalus, and she was pure Macedonian blood. Olympius understood immediately what this marriage meant. If Cleopatra gave Philip a son, that son would have a stronger claim to the throne than Alexander. Alexander's mother was from a foreign kingdom. Alexander was half foreign. A new son from pure Macedonian blood would be preferred by the Macedonian nobles. At the wedding feast, as wine flowed and Philip's generals celebrated, Attalus stood up drunk and raised his cup high. He shouted, "Let us pray that Philip gives us a legitimate heir." The implication cut through the room like a blade. Alexander was illegitimate. Alexander was foreign. Alexander's claim was weak. Alexander threw his wine cup directly at Attalus's face. Blood ran down the older man's cheek. Attalus reached for his sword. Philip rose from his throne, sword drawn, moving toward his own son with the clear intention to kill him. In that moment, something broke. Alexander turned and ran. He fled Macedon. He rode across the border to Iliad, to the kingdom of his mother's relatives. For 6 months, he did not know if he would ever see his homeland again. For 6 months, he believed his father would execute him if he returned. But Olympias did not sit idle. She orchestrated secret communications. She moved pieces on the political board like a master strategist. She made it clear to Philip that his son's execution would destroy the unity of Macedon. That killing the boy he had spent 13 years grooming for greatness would be a catastrophic mistake. Philip eventually agreed. He sent envoys. He offered reconciliation. Alexander returned to Macedon at 18 years old. The crisis was over, but the wound remained forever. In 338 BC, when Philip prepared for war against the united forces of Athens and Thebes, he placed his 18-year-old son in command of the left flank of the Macedonian army. It was a position of enormous responsibility. It was also a test. The Sacred Band of Thebes was the most elite military unit in all of Greece. 300 warriors who had trained together so long that they moved as one organism. They wore crimson cloaks. They were led by the general Gorgidas, and they were nearly invincible. The Battle of Chaeronea raged. Philip's right flank was losing ground. The Greek alliance was pushing forward. The Macedonian line was beginning to crack. That was when Alexander saw the moment. He did not wait for orders. He gathered his cavalry around him, the finest horsemen in Macedon, and he charged directly at the Sacred Band. The Sacred Band's disciplined formation had never broken. It had never wavered. It had never faced anything like Alexander's charge. 300 elite warriors died that day. Not one survived. Alexander was 18 years old. Philip wept when he saw what his son had done. Not tears of sadness, tears of recognition. He understood in that moment that he was no longer the most powerful force in Macedon. His son had become something greater than he was. 2 years later, in 336 BC, Philip was celebrating. He had unified all of Greece under the League of Corinth. He was crowned king of Greece. He was preparing the invasion of Persia that would make him immortal. Everything was finally perfect. At a wedding feast, Philip walked between two columns toward his throne. A bodyguard named Pausanias stepped out of the shadows and stabbed him. The king of Macedon fell bleeding to the floor. Who ordered the murder? Nobody ever knew. Olympias certainly had reason. Attalus certainly had motive. The Greeks certainly wanted Philip dead. But the truth died with Philip. What mattered was that his 20-year-old son was suddenly king. Alexander moved with the speed and decisiveness that would define his entire life. Within weeks, every potential rival was executed. Attalus was killed in Iliad. Every noble who doubted Alexander's claim was eliminated. Then he marched to Greece. The Greek city-states believed a young king would be weak. They rebelled. Athens refused to recognize him. Thebes raised an army. Sparta prepared for war. Alexander marched south and crushed them. When Thebes resisted, he did something that shocked the entire Greek world. He destroyed the city completely. 40,000 people were killed. 30,000 were enslaved. Only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. The message was unmistakable. Resistance means death. By 335 BC, Alexander had consolidated his power. He marched north and defeated the barbarian kingdoms, threatening Macedon. He became the first Greek to cross the Danube River. He was 21 years old, and he had proven himself as a king. But he had not yet proven himself as a conqueror. In spring of 334 BC, Alexander assembled his army. 40,000 soldiers total, 30,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry. The finest commanders of the age: Parmenion, the veteran general who had fought alongside Philip; Hephaestion, Alexander's childhood friend and the person he loved most in the world; Craterus, a brutal warrior of legendary strength; Ptolemy, who would one day write the history of this entire campaign. They had minimal supplies. Alexander was betting everything on the principle that conquest would provide. As he conquered new lands, he would gather new resources, new soldiers, new wealth. It was a strategy that had never been attempted before at this scale. It was insane. It was exactly what Alexander would do. Before he departed, Alexander did something that revealed the depths of his ambition and his understanding of power. He went to the oracle at Delphi, the same oracle that had prophesied his birth. The priestess refused to give him a reading. It was the wrong season. The gods were not speaking. Alexander walked into the sacred chamber anyway and took the priestess by the hand. He said, "You will speak." The priestess, startled by his audacity, laughed. She said, "You are unstoppable." Alexander released her hand and smiled. "That," he said, "was all I needed to hear." He left Delphi knowing that even the oracle had confirmed what he had always believed. His destiny was inevitable. The gods had chosen him. In spring 334 BC, Alexander stood at the shore of the Hellespont, the narrow straits that separated Greece from Asia. His mother Olympias had begged him not to go. She had tried to hold him back. But Alexander was finished being king of a small kingdom. He was ready to become what the oracle had prophesied. He was ready to be the serpent. He crossed the Hellespont with his army. 160 ships carried his soldiers across the straits. And when he reached the Asian shore, he rode immediately to Troy, the city from the Iliad, the city where Achilles had fought. He walked to Achilles' tomb. He anointed it with sacred oil. And he spoke the words that defined his entire vision of himself. I am Achilles reborn. At 20 years old, Alexander became king of a small kingdom. At 22 years old, he left that kingdom behind. The serpent was awake, and the world would burn.